Paul Newman's film debut was so embarrassing that he literally paid for newspaper ads begging people not to watch it. Martin Scorsese called it a guilty pleasure despite its terrible reputation, and the movie won its world premiere through a Christmas charity stamp-selling contest. From bizarre abstract sets to accidental marketing genius, this biblical epic hides some of Hollywood's strangest production stories. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Silver Chalice. Fact 1. Newman's $1,200 public apology backfired spectacularly. Paul Newman hated his first movie so much that he actually paid money to warn people not to watch it, but his plan completely backfired and turned the film into a television sensation. In 1963, nearly a decade after The Silver Chalice flopped in theaters, a Los Angeles television station announced they would be broadcasting the biblical epic for an entire week, showing it every single night on Channel 9. Newman was horrified at the thought of millions of people seeing what he considered his most embarrassing professional moment. So he decided to take drastic action. The young actor, who by then had established himself as a serious Hollywood star, spent $1,200 of his own money to buy advertisement space in 2 major Hollywood trade newspapers. The ads were simple but direct, reading, "Paul Newman apologizes every night this week, Channel 9. Newman genuinely believed he was performing a public service by warning viewers away from what he later called the worst motion picture produced during the 1950s. What Newman didn't anticipate was basic human psychology. Instead of keeping people away, his unprecedented public apology had exactly the opposite effect. The unusual ads created a buzz throughout Los Angeles, with people becoming curious about just how bad a movie could be if its own star was paying money to apologize for it. Word spread quickly about Newman's desperate plea, and suddenly everyone wanted to see this supposedly terrible film for themselves. When the broadcast week arrived, The Silver Chalice achieved the highest television ratings of any program that week, drawing massive audiences who tuned in specifically because Newman had told them not to watch. The actor was reportedly stunned by this turn of events, having accidentally created one of the most effective reverse psychology marketing campaigns in television history. His sincere attempt at damage control had instead transformed his biggest career embarrassment into a must-see television event. Fact 2. A Christmas charity contest decided the world premiere. Instead of choosing glamorous Hollywood or New York for their movie premiere, Warner Brothers decided to let a nationwide charity competition determine where The Silver Chalice would make its debut, leading to one of the most unusual premiere locations in film history. The studio partnered with the National Tuberculosis Association, which had been selling Christmas seals since the early 1900s, as a fundraising effort to combat the deadly lung disease that was still claiming thousands of lives each year. The competition was simple but ambitious. Whichever town or city in America sold the most Christmas seals per capita would win the honor of hosting the world premiere of this major Hollywood production. These special stamps, sold for just 1 cent each at post offices across the country, helped fund tuberculosis research and treatment programs, making the contest both a publicity stunt and a genuine charitable effort. When the final tallies were counted in 1954, the winner was tiny Saranac Lake, New York, a small Adirondack mountain town with a population of just a few thousand people. This remote village had a special connection to tuberculosis treatment, as it was home to several famous sanatoriums where patients came to recover in the clean mountain air, including the Adirondack Cottage Sanitarium, where many wealthy and famous people had been treated. The victory celebration turned into a full weekend spectacle in December of 1954, complete with a parade featuring horse-drawn sleighs carrying the movie stars down Main Street during the town's annual winter carnival. Director Victor Saville, along with stars Virginia Mayo, Pier Angeli, and Jack Palance, all participated in the festivities, though notably Paul Newman chose not to attend his own film debut premiere. Television personality Art Linkletter served as the master of ceremonies for the gala screening at the local Pontiac Theater, where the entire town gathered to watch this biblical epic that had cost Warner Brothers nearly $5 million to produce. Fact 3. James Dean rejected the lead role. James Dean had the chance to make his Hollywood debut in The Silver Chalice, but walked away from the project because he and his agent thought the script was absolutely terrible, a decision that would completely change the trajectory of 2 major acting careers. In 1953, Warner Brothers was actively searching for a young, intense actor to play Basil, the Greek sculptor who becomes commissioned to create a silver chalice for the Holy Grail, and Dean was high on their list of potential leading men. At the time, Dean was still a relatively unknown actor working primarily in television and theater, desperately seeking his big break into major motion pictures. The role in The Silver Chalice represented exactly the kind of opportunity most struggling actors would kill for. A starring role in a big-budget biblical epic from a major studio, complete with lavish sets, exotic locations, and a cast of established Hollywood stars. However, after reading the screenplay by Lesser Samuels, both Dean and his agent quickly concluded that the material was simply not worth pursuing, regardless of the potential career benefits. Their rejection opened the door for Paul Newman, who was also being considered by Warner Brothers for the leading role in another upcoming project called East of Eden. In a strange twist of fate, Dean ultimately landed the East of Eden role that Newman had been pursuing, while Newman ended up with The Silver Chalice that Dean had rejected. This swap would prove to be career-defining for both actors, though in completely opposite ways. Dean's instincts about the script proved to be absolutely correct, as East of Eden became a critical and commercial success that launched him to immediate stardom, while The Silver Chalice became one of the most notorious flops of the 1950s. During the filming of East of Eden, Dean even visited Newman on the set of The Silver Chalice, where he met Italian actress Pier Angeli, who would become the great love of his tragically short life. Fact 4. The real Antioch Chalice inspired the story. The entire story of The Silver Chalice was inspired by a real archaeological discovery that initially fooled experts into believing they had found the actual Holy Grail, only to later realize they had been completely wrong about what the artifact actually was. Around 1908, archaeologists discovered an ornate silver chalice in the ancient city of Antioch, located in what is now modern-day Turkey, and the elaborate piece immediately captured the attention of scholars and religious enthusiasts around the world. The artifact consisted of a plain silver inner cup, surrounded by an incredibly detailed outer shell, decorated with intricate grapevine patterns, birds, animals, and 12 human figures seated in high-backed chairs holding scrolls. 2 of these figures were believed to represent Christ himself, while the other 10 were thought to be his apostles, leading experts to initially conclude that this was the cup Jesus had used during the Last Supper. The discovery created an international sensation, with many people convinced that the legendary Holy Grail had finally been found after centuries of searching. This excitement over the supposed Holy Grail discovery directly inspired author Thomas Costain to write his 1952 novel The Silver Chalice, which became a bestseller and remained on the New York Times bestseller list for an impressive 64 weeks. Costain crafted his fictional story around the idea of a young silversmith being commissioned to create an ornate holder for the sacred cup, weaving together biblical characters and historical events from the 1st century. However, further scholarly examination of the real Antioch chalice eventually revealed that the experts had been mistaken about both its age and its purpose. Rather than dating from the 1st century as originally believed, the artifact was actually created during the 6th century, approximately 500 years after Christ's death. Even more surprising, researchers determined that the elaborate piece was not a drinking cup at all, but rather a standing lamp used in early Christian churches, possibly created to honor Christ's words, "I am the light of the world." Fact 5. Natalie Wood's contact lens continuity disaster. Natalie Wood created one of the most noticeable continuity errors in film history when she abandoned her uncomfortable contact lenses halfway through filming, causing her character's eyes to mysteriously change color from blue to brown as the movie progressed. The 16-year-old actress had been cast to play Helena as a young woman, while Virginia Mayo portrayed the same character as an adult, creating an immediate problem for the filmmakers who needed the 2 actresses to look believable as the same person at different ages. To help sell this illusion, the makeup and costume departments went to great lengths to make Wood resemble Mayo as closely as possible, including bleaching Wood's naturally dark hair to match Mayo's blonde locks and applying heavy makeup to create similar facial features. However, the most challenging issue was their completely different eye colors. Mayo had striking blue eyes while Wood's were naturally brown, a difference that would be glaringly obvious to audiences watching the film in the new widescreen cinemascope format that showed actors' faces in unprecedented detail. The solution seemed simple enough at the time. Wood would wear blue contact lenses during all of her scenes to match Mayo's eye color. Contact lenses in 1954 were far more primitive and uncomfortable than modern versions, made from hard plastic materials that often caused irritation, pain, and excessive tearing for the wearer. Wood gamely tried to endure the discomfort during her earliest scenes, but as filming continued, she found the lenses increasingly unbearable to wear for the long hours required on a movie set. Eventually, Wood made the decision to simply stop wearing the contact lenses altogether, filming the majority of her scenes with her natural brown eyes clearly visible on camera. This created a bizarre situation where audiences could actually watch Helena's eyes change color depending on which scenes they were viewing, making it obvious that two completely different actresses were playing the same character. The eye color inconsistency became one of many production problems that plagued the film and contributed to its reputation as a poorly made movie. Fact 6. Martin Scorsese's unexpected champion. Martin Scorsese became one of the most surprising defenders of the Silver Chalice, openly calling it a guilty pleasure, and actually hiring the film's production designer specifically because he was so impressed with the visual work in this supposedly terrible movie. In 1978, the legendary director wrote about his admiration for the film in a piece about his guilty pleasures, explaining that while he acknowledged it was considered a bad picture, he found something genuinely fascinating about its bold artistic choices. Scorsese was particularly drawn to the work of Boris Levin, who had served as the film's production designer and created the unusual abstract sets that most critics had dismissed as cheap-looking and inappropriate for a biblical epic. Rather than seeing these minimalist modernist designs as a failure, Scorsese viewed them as revolutionary and ahead of their time, describing them as clean and clear, and creating almost like another life, another world, that transported viewers to a completely different reality. The director became so impressed with Levin's distinctive visual approach that he made a remarkable career decision. When it came time to hire a production designer for his own ambitious musical film New York in the late 1970s, Scorsese specifically sought out Boris Levin for the job. In explaining his choice, Scorsese stated that The Silver Chalice was one of the main reasons he hired Levin, along with the designer's work on the epic film Giant, saying that any man who could design those two very different films was exactly what he needed for his project. Scorsese also praised the film's forward-thinking approach to historical authenticity, arguing that since no one really knows what ancient Rome looked like anyway, the filmmakers were smart to take a creative approach similar to what Federico Fellini would later do with Satyricon, essentially making it science fiction in reverse. This perspective showed how one of cinema's greatest directors could find artistic merit in a film that almost everyone else considered a complete disaster. Fact 7. The Dresden Amen's musical Holy Grail connection. Franz Waxman created a brilliant musical connection to the Holy Grail legend by incorporating the same ancient melody that Richard Wagner had used decades earlier in his famous opera about the quest for the sacred cup. The composer chose to build his main theme around a six-note ascending musical phrase known as the Dresden Amen, a traditional melody that had been sung by German church choirs during religious services in early 19th century Saxony, and had become deeply associated with sacred and mystical themes in classical music. This particular musical motif had already gained fame in the world of opera when Wagner selected it as the foundation for his leitmotif, representing the Holy Grail in Parsifal, one of his most celebrated works about medieval knights searching for the sacred chalice. By choosing this same melody for the Silver Chalice, Waxman was deliberately connecting his film score to one of the most famous musical treatments of the Grail legend, creating an instant sense of reverence and mysticism that audiences would subconsciously recognize, even if they couldn't identify the specific source. Waxman joined the ranks of other distinguished composers like Felix Mendelssohn, who had also incorporated the Dresden Amen into their classical compositions, making him part of a musical tradition that stretched back generations. In his hands, the ancient melody became the foundation for what he called the Holy Grail theme, which he wove throughout the entire film score using solemn horns and rapidly ascending strings, adorned with chimes and glockenspiel, to create what he described as a reverent and mystical expression meant to evoke the divine. The composer's sophisticated approach to the score earned him his 10th Academy Award nomination, and the music became one of the few universally praised elements of the otherwise maligned film. Waxman was so proud of this particular score that he later reused portions of it in his work for The Nun's Story in 1958, and incorporated similar orchestrations into his 1959 oratorio based on the biblical book of Joshua. Fact 8. Abstract sets that shocked Hollywood. The film completely abandoned the traditional approach to biblical epic design by featuring deliberately minimalist and abstract sets that looked more like modern art installations than ancient Jerusalem or Rome, shocking audiences who expected the usual lavish recreations of historical locations. Director Victor Seville made the bold decision to hire Rolf Gerard, a stage designer from the New York Metropolitan Opera, rather than a typical Hollywood production designer, specifically because he wanted to create something completely different from the ornate, historically accurate sets that had become standard for religious epics of the 1950s. Gerard's revolutionary approach involved creating stark, geometric backgrounds with clean lines and simplified architectural forms that bore no resemblance to actual ancient buildings or archaeological evidence from the biblical period. Instead of trying to recreate what Jerusalem or Rome might have actually looked like 2,000 years ago, the sets featured smooth, rectangular surfaces and abstract shapes that allowed the actors to stand out dramatically against neutral backgrounds, almost like performers on a theatrical stage rather than characters in a realistic historical setting. The designer used colors symbolically throughout the film, with white marble-like sets representing the city of Antioch, golden tones for Jerusalem, and red and black combinations for Rome, creating a visual language that prioritized emotional impact over historical accuracy. Even the crowd scenes were carefully planned with extras dressed in light, neutral colors so that the main characters would pop off the screen in their more elaborate costumes. Critics were completely divided about this artistic choice, with some dismissing the sets as cheap-looking and inappropriate for a major studio production, while others praised them as remarkably innovative and ahead of their time. The unusual visual approach was so striking that it drew comparisons to science fiction films, and with some reviewers describing the aesthetic as science fiction in reverse because it imagined the ancient world through a completely futuristic lens rather than attempting any kind of historical realism. Fact 9. Jack Palance's career weirdest costumes. Jack Palance found himself wearing the most outrageous and theatrical costumes of his entire acting career while playing Simon the Magician, with his final flying scene outfit becoming so bizarre that even critics accustomed to over-the-top biblical epic wardrobes were left speechless by its sheer strangeness. Throughout his long career, Palance had portrayed countless villains in westerns, war films, and dramas, but nothing had prepared audiences for the wild array of costumes he would sport as the deranged sorcerer who believes he can replace Christ as the true Messiah. The costume department seemed to abandon any sense of historical accuracy or restraint when designing Palance's wardrobe, creating elaborate outfits that looked more like they belonged in a surreal theatrical production than a Hollywood movie set in ancient Rome. His various robes and ceremonial garments featured bold patterns, unusual fabrics, and dramatic flowing elements that emphasized his character's increasing madness and megalomaniacal delusions as the story progressed. However, it was Palance's final costume in the climactic flying scene that truly pushed the boundaries of cinematic fashion into completely uncharted territory. For the sequence where Simon attempts to prove his divine powers by flying from a tower, the costume designers created an outfit so theatrical and outlandish that it defied description, featuring wing-like elements and dramatic flowing fabric that was meant to help sell the illusion of flight, but instead looked utterly ridiculous on screen. Critics noted that while biblical epics were known for their elaborate and sometimes historically questionable costume choices, Palance's wardrobe in the Silver Chalice managed to stand out as particularly excessive even by the standards of the genre. The actor himself seemed to embrace the absurdity of his costumes, delivering his performance with such enthusiastic overacting that he managed to make the bizarre outfits work within the context of his character's descent into complete madness and self-deification. Fact 10. Newman's private screening noise. Making party. Paul Newman found such a creative way to deal with his embarrassment over The Silver Chalice that he turned watching his own terrible movie into a hilarious party game for his friends, complete with kitchen utensils as makeshift musical instruments for heckling his performance. Years after the film's release, when Newman had established himself as a major Hollywood star and could afford to laugh at his early career missteps, he decided to host a special screening of his debut film at his own home for a select group of close friends and fellow actors. Rather than simply subjecting his guests to a painful viewing experience, Newman came up with an ingenious solution that would turn the screening into an interactive comedy event. Before the movie began, he handed out an assortment of kitchen items to everyone in attendance, including metal pots, pans, wooden spoons, and various other household objects that could be used to create loud, rhythmic noises. He then encouraged his friends to use these improvised instruments to provide their own critical commentary throughout the film. The rules of Newman's screening party were simple but effective. Whenever the movie reached a particularly awful moment, whether it was a piece of terrible dialogue, an embarrassing acting choice, or one of the film's many technical problems, the guests were invited to bang their pots and pans together in a cacophonous expression of disapproval. This created a raucous atmosphere where Newman and his friends could openly mock the film's shortcomings while celebrating just how far the actor's career had progressed since his disastrous debut. The screening became legendary among Newman's circle of friends as both a brilliant example of the actor's self-deprecating sense of humor and a perfect way to transform a genuinely painful viewing experience into an evening of therapeutic laughter. By encouraging his guests to literally make noise during the worst parts of his performance, Newman demonstrated that he had not only survived his early career embarrassment, but had learned to embrace it as part of his journey to stardom. Fact 11. Lorne Greene's Hollywood debut before Bonanza fame. Lorne Greene made his Hollywood film debut playing the Apostle St. Peter in The Silver Chalice, launching a movie career that would eventually lead him to become one of television's most beloved father figures as Ben Cartwright on Bonanza just 5 years later. At the time of his casting in 1954, Greene was primarily known as a radio broadcaster in his native Canada, where he had earned the nickname the Voice of Canada for his work as the national newscaster during World War II, delivering wartime updates in his distinctive deep baritone voice that made him a household name across the country. Greene had only recently made the transition from radio to acting when he moved to New York in 1953 to pursue opportunities in theater and television, landing roles in Broadway productions and appearing on prestigious live television programs like Studio One. His performance as the thought police official in the television adaptation of George Orwell's 1984 had impressed Hollywood producers, leading to his casting as the wise and authoritative St. Peter in this biblical epic, alongside Paul Newman's debut performance. The role of St. Peter proved to be perfect preparation for Greene's future career as a television patriarch, as both characters required him to project wisdom, moral authority, and paternal guidance to younger characters. His commanding presence and naturally authoritative voice made him an ideal choice for playing religious and father figures, qualities that would serve him well when he was cast as Ben Cartwright in Bonanza in 1959. Although The Silver Chalice was widely considered a failure, Greene's performance was generally well received by critics and helped establish him as a reliable character actor in Hollywood. The experience of working on a major studio production also gave him valuable insights into the film industry that would benefit him throughout his subsequent career in both movies and television, ultimately leading to his iconic 14-year run as the Ponderosa Patriarch. Fact 12. A 8-year-old playing a teenager. The casting department created one of the most ridiculous age mismatches in film history when they paired 16-year-old Natalie Wood with 28-year-old Peter Reynolds to play teenage versions of the main characters, resulting in a 12-year age gap between actors who were supposed to be the same age on screen. The film's structure required flashback scenes showing the main characters Helena and Basil as young people before they became adults, which meant the filmmakers needed to cast younger actors to portray these earlier versions of Virginia Mayo and Paul Newman's characters. For the role of young Helena, the casting choice made perfect sense. Natalie Wood was actually 16 years old during filming, making her the ideal age to convincingly portray a teenage version of the character. Wood was already an experienced child actor who had appeared in numerous films since the 1940s, and her youthful appearance and acting skills made her a natural choice for playing Helena as a young woman discovering her place in the world. However, the casting of Peter Reynolds as young Basil created an immediately obvious problem that became glaringly apparent whenever the two actors appeared on screen together. Reynolds was a full-grown adult man of 28 who looked nothing like a teenager, despite the makeup department's best efforts to make him appear younger through costume choices and lighting techniques. The age difference between the two actors was so pronounced that audiences could clearly see they were watching a middle-aged man acting alongside an actual teenager. This bizarre casting decision became even more problematic because the characters were supposed to be childhood friends and potential romantic interests, making their scenes together feel deeply uncomfortable and unrealistic. The visual disparity between Wood's genuinely youthful appearance and Reynolds' mature features made it impossible for viewers to believe these characters had grown up together or were even close to the same age, adding yet another layer of unintentional comedy to a film that was already struggling with numerous production problems. Fact 13. Studio workers injured in desert location accident. Real-world danger struck the already troubled production when two Warner Brothers studio workers were seriously injured in an automobile collision on the Hollywood freeway while traveling to the desert location shoots near Palm Springs, California, adding genuine drama to a film that was already experiencing numerous behind-the-scenes problems. The accident occurred during the summer of 1953, as the production crew was making regular trips between the studio in Burbank and the remote desert locations, where they were filming the biblical epic's outdoor sequences. The desert scenes were crucial to the film's visual storytelling, as director Victor Saville wanted to capture authentic Middle Eastern landscapes that would help transport audiences to the ancient world of first-century Palestine and Syria. However, shooting in the Palm Springs area required constant transportation of equipment, crew members, and supplies across the busy Hollywood freeway, one of Los Angeles's most dangerous and heavily trafficked highways that connected the studio system to locations throughout Southern California. The collision happened during one of these routine trips when studio personnel were either heading to or returning from the desert location, though specific details about the exact circumstances of the crash were not widely reported in the trade publications of the time. The accident was serious enough to result in injuries to both workers, creating additional complications for a production that was already dealing with budget concerns, scheduling difficulties, and the challenges of working with the new CinemaScope filming technology that required specialized equipment and techniques. The highway accident became part of the growing legend surrounding the Silver Chalice as a cursed or troubled production. Joining the list of problems that included difficult working conditions, creative conflicts between the director and stars, and the ongoing struggle to make the film's unusual artistic vision work within the constraints of a major studio biblical epic. The incident also highlighted the very real dangers that film crews faced during location shooting in the early 1950s, when safety protocols were far less developed than they would become in later decades. Fact 14. The mirror trick behind Helena's severed head. The film's most gruesome visual effect was created using an incredibly simple but clever mirror trick that made it appear as though Helena's severed head was sitting on a stone ledge, achieved by placing a diagonal mirror underneath the ledge and having the actress position herself behind it so that only her head would be visible to the camera. This scene occurs during the climax of the film when Helena, played by Virginia Mayo, meets her tragic end after being forced to attempt Simon the Magician's impossible flying stunt from a high tower in front of Emperor Nero and the bloodthirsty Roman crowd. The special effects team needed to create the illusion that Helena's head had been separated from her body and was resting on a ledge as a grisly trophy, but they had to accomplish this effect using the limited technology available in 1954, long before the era of sophisticated makeup effects or digital manipulation. Rather than attempting to create an expensive and complicated prosthetic head or using multiple camera angles and editing tricks, the filmmakers came up with an elegantly simple solution that required nothing more than a strategically placed mirror and careful positioning of the actress. The technique worked by angling a mirror at precisely the right diagonal underneath the stone ledge prop, which reflected Virginia Mayo's actual head and made it appear to be sitting directly on top of the ledge surface. Mayo had to position herself behind the set piece and carefully align her head with the mirror's reflection so that when the camera captured the scene, audiences would see what appeared to be her disembodied head resting on the stone surface. This low-tech approach to creating a shocking visual effect was typical of the era's filmmaking techniques, when special effects artists had to rely on practical ingenuity rather than expensive technology to achieve dramatic results. The mirror trick was so effective that many viewers never realized they were looking at a simple optical illusion rather than an elaborate special effect, demonstrating how creativity and clever positioning could create convincing movie magic on a limited budget. Fact 15. A barber disguised as an assassin. The film opens with what appears to be a violent knife attack taking place in the busy streets of ancient Antioch, But sharp-eyed viewers who look closely will discover that the supposed assault is actually just a street barber giving a customer a routine haircut and shave, creating an unintentional optical illusion that fooled countless moviegoers into thinking they were witnessing a brutal crime. This scene occurs during the establishing shots that introduce audiences to the bustling marketplace atmosphere of first-century Antioch, where the young protagonist Basil lives and works as an apprentice silversmith before his life takes a dramatic turn. The confusion arises because of the camera angle and the way the scene is framed, which shows a man wielding what looks like a knife or blade while leaning over another person who appears to be in distress or pain. Without the proper context or a clearer view of what's actually happening, the quick glimpse of this interaction during the montage of street life creates the immediate impression that audiences are watching a violent attack unfold in the background of the main action. However, what viewers are actually seeing is a completely normal and peaceful commercial transaction that would have been a common sight on the streets of any ancient city, where barbers typically worked outdoors and used sharp razors and knives to cut hair and shave beards for their customers. The man with the blade is simply a working barber plying his trade, while his customer is probably just reacting to the discomfort of getting a close shave with the primitive tools of the era. This accidental visual trick became one of many small details that contributed to the film's reputation for confusing and misleading audiences, as viewers found themselves constantly questioning what they were seeing on screen. The barber scene serves as a perfect example of how the film's unusual visual choices and abstract production design could create unintended interpretations that distracted from the main story and added to the overall sense of bewilderment that many people experienced while watching this biblical epic.